From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, I'm Rob Cairns. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas That's Stunning Digital Marketing. I'm pleased and proud to introduce our new segment, Security with Tim. Tim Nash will be joining me once a month on the SDM show to talk about all things security. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation that Tim and I had. This podcast is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency that can help protect your WordPress website today. Go to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and see what we can do to help you protect your business investment. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here, and today I'm here with my good friend, security expert, Mr. Tim Nash. How are you, Tim?
Hello, I'm all right. How are you?
Doing well, and I can see by your window it's nice and sunny today. And have you had
Yeah,
any rain, British weather yet?
yeah, it's bucking the stereotype quite a lot, but no, it's beautiful today, which is why the window's open, the sun's out. It's a lovely evening. But don't worry, it's been pouring down with rain the last few days before this. This is the first time I took the opportunity earlier to do some quick videos because there's sunshine, and so I don't actually need all the studio lights and stuff to mimic being in a nice sunny place.
Yeah, it's actually hot and humid here. Today we are on this verge for like 40 Celsius all week. So welcome to sticky, my friend. Welcome to sticky.
No, no. What you want is a nice cool evening. It's 17 degrees here. There's a little breeze, but that's it. And hopefully this is our summer now.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were working on quick videos. So we might as well dive in there first. You're doing some interesting video stuff for your YouTube channel. Want to tell us about it?
Well, yeah, I launched a YouTube channel. I'm a YouTuber now. I believe I'm actually legally required to say that up front whenever I talk to somebody.
You
I
are.
have to introduce myself as, hi, I'm Tim and I'm a YouTuber. But yeah, no, I started doing some YouTube videos. I've not got very much on the channel at the moment. I have one long form video and I've started doing these little shorts, which I've been putting out on YouTube and LinkedIn. I'm really enjoying it. It's a lot of fun. And it's getting engagement, which is cool because it's interesting how quite a few of my shorts are in fact just me saying the same thing that I said in a LinkedIn post.
Yeah.
And the engagement is completely different, which is really cool because it means I'm reaching people who obviously looked at the text and went, oh God, it's a wall of text.
Yeah, I've done that experiment where I've said something in a blog post and then I've thrown it in a 5-minute short podcast, and it's like night and day, the engagement. And I think video and podcasting, and they overlap, by the way, they still draw a different crowd than those who read a blog post or a LinkedIn post or a social media post.
It is very chalk and cheese. There are some people who absolutely hate especially the short format, that TikTok style format. People, either you really like it and you find it engaging and it gives you that little dopamine hit, or you really hate it and it's like, I just want to go, don't want to touch it. For me, I very much was in that camp of, I hate this. But what I've seen is that I can reach people and just give them that little nudge. It's very much, I guess if you were a marketer, it would be nudge marketing. And for me, as more of an educator, it's just a nudge education. If I can leave a little thing in your head that makes you think, and the next time you sat down at the computer, you go, oh yeah, what was that? Oh yeah, maybe I'll go turn that on, or I'll go do that, or I'll go do something else. So I'm really enjoying it. And I'm also really enjoying doing the scary stories, which I've published one. And I've got a couple more. I had a little bit of a stall. I came up with this really great script for a story. And then some real world stuff happened. that was just a little bit too close to home.
Yeah.
And I went and so I filmed the script, and I went to go and edit it, and it was just like, no. That could go on the back burner for a little while, just while life stuff goes on. So one day that will come out, and in the meantime, we've got some more coming soon. So I'm really pleased.
That's awesome. And I should tell you, I'm really enjoying the channel and I'm glad you're doing it. And it just brings out, for those people who don't know you well, it brings out a different side of you. And I think that's the value of doing the videos. So well done, Tim. Keep it up, please.
Thank you. I like having people. I like scaring people, but I like people to actually think that I'm a human being, and it's getting that balance right.
Me too. I'm so there. Um, we were talking before the show about two dreaded letters called AI, and I always in a
Just to check,
security.
we're talking about Apple Intelligence, right?
Yes, you are. And in the security conversation, I always like to go down that road a little bit because we know AI impacts. We know, I would believe it's impacting security right now. Do you have any quick thoughts on that?
I mean, AI, well, large language models, to try and force it to even a little bit down the technical world, large language models are having an impact everywhere. In security, we're not seeing the effects I think most people think. We're not having. I think quite a lot of people still think AI is this like massive robot killing machine thing. Large language models are really expensive to run and use. So what we're not seeing them is in like wholesale spam and bot attacks, but you are seeing them maybe generating the content for such attacks.
Yes.
Um, I'm certainly seeing slightly improvements in, say, phishing attacks, where it would appear that people have stopped trying to write their own phishing emails and have got an AI to do that for them, which is great because they were rubbish at it and it's a little bit better. But on the counter side to that, there are some really cool new tools coming out. Lots of tools around log analysis and being able to pick up on patterns, which is where we always should be throwing computers at. That's what computers are good at, is where we can go, here is a whole ton of data. Find me the pattern. Now, up until recently, that would be really, really CPU intensive because while I said computers would be really good at it, should be in the operative word, and they historically haven't been. And AI allows people to look at the same statistical patterns that, say, a human would be looking at. And so they're more likely to bring back patterns that we would consider to be relevant. So that's quite cool. But no, I haven't seen any of that. AI is going to take my job yet. I'm sure it's coming. I have on the development side, watching junior developers sort of, I don't think will exist in 5 to 10 years at our current rate. We're in a very weird scenario where I was talking to a friend who's got a son who's going to go potentially to uni, and they were talking about whether or not he should go to uni or whether he should get a job straight away. And I was like, do you know what? 5 years ago, I'd have said, don't go to uni, get that development job, because 5 years doing a job versus 5 years at university, you're going to come out of university and go back to being at the bottom junior level anyway. You might as well get the 5 years experience. Very few companies truly want a degree. But I think actually in the next couple of years, that's going to change, because what do we give juniors to do? How do they learn? We throw them the grunt work. We throw them crud. We throw them, go write this, do this really basic stuff. And what we're going to need in the 5 years' time is people who can think and who can produce, not necessarily produce the prompts, but produce the thought and the creativity of where are we going and what are we going to be doing.
Yeah.
And therefore, the next generation of developers are going to be more information architects than they are developers. And I think suddenly universities are a really cool place to be. And if they adapt, because universities are well renowned for adapting really quickly, but the ones that do adapt really quickly have a real opportunity. So I find AI interesting.
I do too. I think, it's funny you talk about that conversation. I think one of the places universities need to adapt truly is not teaching kids linear. And I have a programming background before I started in the support, before I started in the marketing. And I think one of the things I find with a lot of kids is they don't learn how to problem solve properly. And so universities got to teach, I think, a better job of a problem solving skill. And I think that would be a uh, big aid to the graduates, kind of.
I think that's very true. Especially when you think about where computing sits in a university structure.
Yeah.
It sits a lot often in those science and engineering departments. And I notice when computing sits more with engineering, you find that it's teaching a much more problem-solving approach. But if it sits more on the science side, you get not teaching by rote, because that would be a bit too much, but it very much here is a set of data, you learn it this way, we do it this way. Here are a set of problems, here are the answers. And that's something that you've come across all the time. Here are the problems, here are the answers. I think I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day, it might have been today, where someone was saying, I'm going to be doing a video about these 20, how to solve these 20 problems. How would you format it? And I was there going, well, I'd say show them the route for how you troubleshoot to solve any of these 20 problems. But if you want the views, what you do is solve 20 problems in 1 minute chunks, and you'd get 20 shorts out of it as well. And he was like, oh yeah, I'll go with that route. It's like, no, you're meant to show them, it's that whole teach someone to fish thing. Show them your methodology, and they'll be able to actually do it themselves. And we lack that at the moment. And worse, people are going to turn to AI and type into ChatGPT, how do I solve my problem? And we are in Stack Overflow territory. Oh yes, what you should do is just put a sudo in front of that rm-rf / and delete everything.
Yeah, I get it. So moving on, one thing I do want to address in the security realm is this problem called voice validation. And a lot of people, they go to their telecom company, they use voice validation. They go to the bank, they use voice validation. And you just said that AI doesn't have a big impact in the security world necessarily. I wonder, and it's just my opinion, if you shouldn't be using voice validation because of AI. Because if you're a well-known person, you've got a podcast, you've done media interviews, your voice is everywhere. Can your voice be cloned, which will get you past voice validation? What is your thought on that one?
I mean, it will. I guess we're going to have to sit back and whenever you do this sort of thing, it's like, what is your threat model?
Yeah.
If I am Joe Blogs and I don't regularly go on podcasts and publish my stuff on the internet, and nobody cares about me particularly, I don't have an exciting life, and I probably don't have millions in the bank, and I have 24 cents in the bank and a bunch of credit card debt, is voice validation on my bank account as big a deal? What's the worst that can happen? Oh, someone's going to pay my mortgage off for me. Great, go ahead. Other people, if you're a celebrity, you probably should change the PIN number on your voicemail. Back here in the UK, we had a massive phone hacking scandal that went over decades with a newspaper who was hacking into voicemails.
Yeah.
Because primarily the default PIN had been kept the same. Now, I absolutely believe that I can see the same sort of slime balls building a AI model of Scarlett Johansson, for example, just picking one, and using that to hack into some sort of voice validated, whether it's a voicemail or a bank or her Tinder account, whatever it is. I can see that happening, and it will happen. But to train that model does cost money. So
Yes.
are you going to do this on a widespread scale against millions of consumers? No, probably not at the moment anyway. Are you going to do it against a handful of celebrities? Absolutely. So your threat model really has to change depending on whether you consider yourself to be a celebrity who's likely to be hacked in this scenario, or Joe, who would like his mortgage paid.
Or do you have a 7-figure investment portfolio, right?
Yeah.
It all
I
depends
mean,
on.
if you've got those things, if you've got something if you've got something worth protecting, you should protect it.
Yes.
And your risk model goes up and the threat goes up when the more value or wealth or whatever is in there. It doesn't mean that no one's going to hack you, but you've got to be worth hacking for that sort of targeted hack, which is very different from, say, hacking a website. When someone goes and hacks websites, they're not, well, in the vast majority of cases, they're not targeting you. They're just automated attacks.
Yes.
So most people who are hacked when it comes to their websites, they weren't targeted. Their site isn't anything special. It was being used and abused. That's what it was. Whereas something like we're talking about here, this is something that's targeted. And so there's got to be a reason to target you. And you've got to have enough value proposition to make the targeting worthwhile. So maybe if you do have a 6-figure, 7-figure portfolio, keep it quiet. Don't advertise it on LinkedIn, and definitely don't do it with a nice 2-minute video where you carefully enunciate all your vowels and constants clearly for somebody to rip off.
Yeah. So you mentioned websites, so let's segue a little bit. I'm a small business owner. You and I both know better. And I say, I don't need to secure my website. Nobody's going to touch my small little website. And you're laughing at me already because you and I both know where this conversation goes and goes very quickly. Why should I care?
I mean, you shouldn't just get yourself hacked. Problem solved. Give me a ring once you need me to clean it. No, that's probably the worst approach. I mean, it's a great approach for me.
Yeah,
That's a
me
very
too.
positive. Why should you care? Because nobody cares about you. Overwhelmingly, as we said, the vast majority of attacks on websites are automated, and it's a business model. So a vulnerability will occur. Let's say something Elementor, for the sake of it. Elementor plugin has a vulnerability in it. It doesn't at the moment. Probably somewhere it does, but it's not exploitable. They come up with a proof of concept, push out an update, but you're not going to update your website because last time you updated your website and you updated Elementor, everything broke and all your shortcodes appeared and it looked horrible. So you're not going to update. But that happened on day one. Elementor puts out this update, says, "Oh yeah, there was a vulnerability in our code." By day two, and we're not even by day two, within a couple of hours, we've got some bad actors who are going, "Oh, how many sites is Elementor on?" "Oh, 40 million. Cool. Right, well, we'll target for 40 million sites, we're going to get a few hits." So they'll take a proof of concept, they'll build a payload into that, and they will create a simple tool to just find vulnerable sites, and they'll ping them off. They'll get a big list, and then they'll drop the payload on, which will give them a nice web shell onto your site. And then they'll go, "Well, what should we do with it?" "Absolutely nothing. We're going to put in a backdoor." And they'll leave it. They'll leave it for about 24 hours to a week because they want to see what's going to happen. In a week, they'll do basically another round of pings where they'll go ding, 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 ding. And anything that responds, they go brilliant, and they put it on a list. Because they now know that you haven't updated for a week, you're probably not going to update now. This is your gold. You're fine. Their backdoor's in place. Everything's good. So once they've got a list and they've got, say, 50 to 100,000 of these sites, they will put this into a big CSV and put it up for sale. They'll say, "I've got 100,000 sites with login details for sale for X dollars." And it's a very small amount. You will hate to discover how little your site is worth. But we're talking pennies, and somebody else will buy that and go, "Cool, thank you very much." And then they'll log in and they'll put in whatever they wanted, whether they want to distribute malware, whether they want to use your site to spam pills via email, whether they want to turn your little shop and just card skim off it, whatever they want to do. But that's like, we're now 2 or 3 parties down the chain. And then when they finished abusing you, they just put you in another list and resell you and resell you and resell you. So your little site makes them more money than it made you very quickly. That's really hard to get back from. Not least because you've got, like, your customers have been lost, your site is hacked. You're feeling rubbish about this. I mean, let's face it, it's not a nice thing to go through, but having your site hacked. And it's just a horrible situation for everybody. It's unlikely to be the nail that totally destroys your business, but so many companies start that death spiral when an incident like this happens.
Yep.
When you go to the insurance company and they say, yeah, of course you've got cyber insurance. Oh, it doesn't cover that. Or, of course you've got cyber insurance. You did do all the updates you were told to, though, right?
Yeah. So true. So true.
No worries.
So the other thing too that you didn't mention while we were talking about your small site being hacked is there's a potential that site might get hacked to leverage an attack against bigger sites, right? And that's often what happens. These bot firms go out and find all these small sites, and then they use them to help bring down a bigger fish in the chain. And that happens, I think, more than people think, right?
Yeah, I mean, right back at the start of this, when we were talking about this idea that they were going to scan for the vulnerability and deliver the payload. Well, when I say they, I don't mean that the bad actor is sitting there on a computer in their basement doing that. They sent the command from their basement, but they will send that to a command and control center, which sounds really cool, but just means a server they've already hacked. And then they will be using other servers that they've already hacked to then send out and do all of this. So, and it all feeds back into their machinery and into their network.
Yes.
And you get these large-scale botnets. And a botnet doesn't have to be from a web server. You know, it can be a toaster if you like. And some of the largest botnets we see on the internet are all from IoT things, so Internet of Things. And it's, once you're in that, it's very difficult to get out of it as well. They don't just leave you alone. You'll find, even if you secure your site up and you do all the things you're meant to do, if you start looking at your log files, you're going to be hammered for the rest of your life. Now, it shouldn't affect your site if you've done things properly, but it is very noticeable, just the sheer amount of bot traffic you get following a hacked site incident, and that stays with you.
Yeah, it's astronomical. Back in the day, we all know, and I'm sure you know, but I know listeners of my past podcast know about the late legendary social reengineering hacker, Kevin Mitnick. And Kevin wrote a number of books, his biggest book called The Art of Deception. And he talks about how he did all this hacking from social reengineering. And then his autobiography or memoir, if you want to call it, Ghost in the Waters, talks about more how he ran from the FBI for years and years. If anybody's interested, it's worth an interesting read, to say the least. Is social reengineering still the problem today as it was 20 years ago? I would say yes, but what's your thought?
Yes. I mean, it certainly hasn't, it's certainly more of a problem. Whether or not it has the, again, we're back to whether or not it's a really targeted attack versus a widespread attack. What we've seen over the last few years is just the sheer amount of automated attacks has magnified so much that those specific targeted attacks, percentage-wise, have got smaller and smaller. That doesn't mean they've become any less, or there's any less of them. It just means that the amount of automated attacks has increased so much. But it's still an issue, and you actually see it a lot more even when you might not see it so much in physical pen testing so much, or no, I was going to say pen testing, but in physical attacks. you can see this as it's starting to shift into things like social engineering, into spear phishing as opposed to phishing. So there's lots of these different routes it's taking and changing. And we going back to our AI conversation, when we do get to the point where CPU costs come down, where models can be trained, you might see more of this style stuff happening more often, maybe, because that cost limit means that you can do much more that is closer to what a human hacker can do
Yep.
versus what an automated bot type scenario is that we have today can do.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, one of the problems we have in the WordPress community, and you and I see it all the time, WordPress is not secure. And I would argue that the problem is WordPress is now, depending on what stat you read, somewhere between 46 and 50% of the market, give or take. And my argument has always been, A, do you trust WordPress to make it more secure? I do. So, and trust the plugin manufacturers that you're using or plugin developers to make it some more secure. I do in my stack. And the argument is the bigger the market share, the more of a hack attempt you are. And it's one of the reasons for years on the computer side, we've seen Windows by Microsoft be a big target because it has 70% of the business market. What are your thoughts on the percentage versus not being more secure or less secure?
I mean, it's worth always saying that visibility does not indicate how secure something is.
Thank you.
So if we're testing if I've got a piece of software over here and it's being used by 1 million people, and I have a piece of software over here being used by one, that one piece of software by one isn't inherently any more or less secure than the one by 1 million. If 1 million people are going to expose that software to the internet, more bots, more things are going to look at it more. And from a bad actor's point of view, finding a 0-day in WordPress, especially in WordPress core, is worth their time.
Yes.
A vulnerability in a big plugin, let's say Yoast, let's say Elementor, let's say WooCommerce, is worth their time to develop an exploit to make use of it. So from the point of scale, so when people talk about scales and arguments about scale, WordPress hasn't become any less secure because it is bigger. And in many ways, you could argue it's the opposite, that it now has many more eyeballs on it. That project of one being used by one, there was no incentive for a security researcher to look at it.
Yes.
Whereas there is a lot of incentive for a security researcher, including a monetary one, to look at WordPress. And we are lucky that however people feel about them, that Automatic do provide a bug bounties on behalf of WordPress, that we do have some maturing bug bounty systems. And this is a good thing because it does mean that we are paying people to find things. Some of the leading security vendors, people like Patchstack and WordFence, are providing bug bounties and are paying people. This is a good thing because it provides good visibility. Are those things balanced? As in, are there enough good people looking at it versus enough bad people who are using to exploit it? Don't know. I don't think, I mean, obviously I use WordPress. I don't think I would use WordPress if I thought that it was inherently a bad proposition. So I do think you have to be really careful about what plugins you use. I almost take umbrage with the idea that WordPress is insecure. WordPress core is doing a pretty good job, especially if you did do like-for-like comparisons against other CMSs. It still has more CVs against its name, but again, I think that's down to scale and more people, more eyeballs on it. And on the whole, the oopsies haven't been, well, over the years, there's definitely been some big oopsies, but in recent years, there haven't been too many dramatic big oopsies from WordPress core. Where it all comes down is plugins and themes. the shift to the new sort of site editing, full site editing, and those minimal themes is seeing that attack surface change. Not necessarily sure it's. I'll go out and say it's reduced. I think in my mind it's reduced, but it's also introduced a whole new one. All of a sudden, SQL injections are a very interesting proposition. I mean, they always were before, but now you have full control of how everything on the site through an SQL injection is interesting. So we're reducing that attack surface, but we still got these big plugins, and until we either dramatically change how plugins interact and work with WordPress, which I can't see happening, because one of the big things about WordPress is you can build a plugin no matter who you are and for almost whatever you want. And you could be a priest and build a plugin, or you could be a big development agency and build a plugin. And sometimes the priest writes much better code than the development agency. And it would be nice if we could potentially bring in more APIs, more ways to limit and to reduce down some scopes of some of the threat surfaces. But people can write, once you write PHP code, that's it. You've given them server access. They're that user. They can just work their way around it anyway. So it's hard. It's a hard one to solve, but I don't think WordPress is the problem. I think people are the problem.
I agree with you on that one. In terms of protecting WordPress, so we all know there's a pile of security plugins out there. Choose one. There's WordFence, there's iThemes, Solid Security, there's PatchStack itself, Solid's based on PatchStack now, the database. Several others. Security's got one, and there's a few more. Should you be running a firewall piece of software or a security plugin at the site level? Is that worth doing?
Interesting.
Yes.
Yes, no, maybe.
I knew that was coming.
So I'm going to preface this with, and I'm quite comfortable saying this, my website doesn't have a WordFence, iThemes, Solid, any of the ones you mentioned.
Okay.
I'm quite happy not running with that. What I do have is a good server-side level firewall structure on WAF. Now, there are some potential advantages to having your WAF understand your application more fully. So if your WAF actually knew what plugins were installed and what vulnerabilities were inside those and could create rules dynamically, that's quite cool. And that's what a lot of the WordPress security plugin WAFs offer, with varying degrees of success, it should be said. But to do that dynamically is really intensive and quite awkward. And most vulnerabilities that, let's use an SQL injection. A WAF can block most SQL injections, the commonly formatted ones, regardless of what plugin is being exploited and has the vulnerability in it, because of the nature of how the payload looks and appears. So a single WAF rule in something like mod security or Naxi or whatever your WAF of choice is, this can do the job that the same plugin would have had to have written dozens, if not hundreds, of lines of code to do, and have that performance impact versus almost none. But at the same time, there are some times where WordPress security plugins do have their benefits. For me, I would say you should have some sort of two-factor authentication. I think that should be standard. I personally use a separate plugin to do that. I can see why somebody might want to use the bundled-in security plugin that does all of this. Same thing for user activity logging. I think this is a really important thing that should be done. There are other things, I make tweaks to, say, user sessions, how long user sessions last. This is something that I do. I've got it as a separate little plugin. I can understand if a security plugin bundled that in. I think actually the only one that I know of that does is Solid.
It does. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't think any of the others do something similar. Again, if you want to make use of things like bcrypt or Argon 2 for your password hashing, you would use a separate plugin. Again, not that many of the security plugins do these sort of things. They tend to focus on things that people think are important, not necessarily what are important.
Yeah.
And more interestingly, what hosts have been protecting you from for all along. My favorite one is you'll find quite a lot of these plugins will tell you how many times they blocked some bad actor from logging into your site. And that one thing annoys me more than anything else for several reasons. One, I don't care, because well done plugin for supposedly doing your job. Congratulations. You should get a little reward. I do care, however, if someone, what I want to know is when someone has logged in.
Yep.
It's not me, and none of them do that. They all do we blocked 60,000 logins. None of them say you logged in last at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday in Peru. It's like, oh, I wasn't in Peru. That's a bit weird. But the bigger thing that frustrates me about this is that almost certainly when they're doing their logging and blocking, they're actually stopping the server from doing its job, which should be to be blocking this stuff. We should be doing that at the server level, and your managed WordPress hosts will almost certainly be doing it. And there's a reasonable chance that you're blocking it too early, so the IPs aren't being put into the disallow list for the server at the server level, which means they're not being distributed out, which means they're not being able to be used by other people. And the final part of that is they're storing that data, the way it says 60,000 logins, in your database. And do you know what one really easy attack is? We'll just send 60 to 100,000 IP addresses at your login page, and we'll just completely bugger up your database and kill it.
Yeah.
So yeah, failed login attempts is a pet peeve of mine. If you find anybody if you see that on a system, whether it's a dedicated plugin, there are plenty of them, or inbound in one of these security plugins, it's just like, it's bad.
My biggest pet peeve is people who think changing the WordPress back end URL to log in is secure. And I'm not a big fan of security by obscurity. So I should tell you that. So I don't even bother. And people say, but, and I'm like, no buts. If people's going to hack your site, there's a million and other ways they're going to get in there besides changing the back end. How do you feel about that?
I mean, this is, when you're sort of sitting there going, it's when I've seen sort of like pen test reports from people,
Yep.
and this has been like high up on the thing, and it's like, okay, if I had nothing better to do in my life ever, and it was raining,
Yeah.
and I'd done everything on my to-do list, my bucket list was done, then I might start to try and wrap my head around the problem of hiding the back end of my site. But at least a couple of the biggest plugins out there that do this are overwritten by this sneaky trick that only good people know, which is instead of typing in the word WP admin or WP login, you just put /admin in and it automatically rewrites.
Yes, of course.
Which apparently is so sneaky of you that nobody else, no one knows this trick beyond obviously us two. And yeah, needless to say,
and the thousand of people now listening to this podcast.
Yeah, well, darn it, we've just ruined security by obscurity for everyone.
Yeah.
Does it make a difference? Potentially, it might. I mean, the argument for blocking bots I would just let bots at it as long as you've got a strong password and a good two-factor authentication. I don't really care if bots hit the login page. There is an argument to say, well, they are causing a performance hit, they are adding to CPU strain, and if the attack's big enough, it would be making a damage. I think that there's probably as much, if not more, CPU performance issues with doing the rewrites for legitimate users than there would be for hiding it from the bad users. I mean, that's not always the case, but in the vast majority it is. So there are much better things to waste your time on and CPU cycles on.
I agree. I agree with it. The same thing as changing like the WordPress hash codes. There are security plugins that do that. Well, folks, if you can get access to the WP config file, guess what? You know,
I
so
mean, there are some times where you do want to change those salts, not regularly, and regularly changing the salts is going to be a painful experience. But there are occasions where you might want to change the salt. That should be a one-off event. I actually find it particularly frustrating when I see people who have a plugin installed to change the salts. It's just like, I don't like the idea that you have a plugin that's editing the WP config file. That's asking
normie.
for trouble. So if you are going to do that, you can just generate. WP CLI would be the better way to do it, or you can just manually go in and just put in some rubbish in those salts. If you go into WP config, go to the defined, you can write your own rubbish in there.
Yeah, no question. I was thinking about this last week before I talked to you about doing the show, and I do updates for about 300 sites, so I have a few. And I just finished going through and doing a security audit on all user audit on all 300 sites. So one of the things I always look at on a regular basis is users, user roles, and is the user still with the company on an ongoing basis or not? So having worked in the corporate world, and when I say the corporate world, the big Fortune 500, I worked in healthcare for 21 years. We used to, if you left the hospital I was with, we would terminate your ID. And I don't know how many times I've seen on a WordPress database the bad actor has been a former employee who's logged in and done something after he's let go he shouldn't have been, and why we don't minimize user roles. So first of all, don't give everybody the admin access because they said it's their site and they can have it. My answer is no. And if you don't like it, go elsewhere. And then my other answer is we need to be very careful that we terminate old accounts that aren't needed and user role management. And I've gone so far, Tim, as if somebody insists on admin, I'll use a plugin that will dumb down the admin privileges and they don't even know it. I've gone that far. What do you think of that scenario in user role management?
So first of all, I think it's really clear to say that sometimes you don't even realize when these things happen. A really good example is one of the major managed WordPress hosts just creates themselves an account. And for a long time, that account's password was test.
Yes.
Across every one of them. And do you know what? It used to fail. It was weird how they got mass hacked repeatedly. Knowing who your users are, it should be like 101. Coming along and going, logging in. Who is this person? What access do they need? Why do they need it? How long do they need it? Again, as you say, corporate world, this is all pretty much standard things. This should be, and it shouldn't change. In many ways, corporate or WordPress sites do quite well at this because they tend to, well, I say tend to, they have things like single sign-on options. So these can be controlled through LDAP and other systems elsewhere. Whereas if you're just manually doing it, at least you should be going in and going, what role do they have? What capabilities do they have? Because most people don't realize that a role is just a group of capabilities that is applied to that user at the point that they're given the role. Now, you can go in and change the capabilities of a user. So you can have Bob, who's a subscriber, but has all the capabilities of an administrator. And it's really hard to work out if Bob has those capabilities unless you're looking for it. And you'd either be, if you're in default WordPress, unless you're using something like WP CLI, you can't actually see any of that. You'd have to be either looking in the database, looking at WP CLI, to be able to see the capabilities of that given user. Now, there are plugins that will extend this out so you can see users' capabilities and things. But yeah, I think, in fact, I put out a short today, which was basically exactly what you were describing, which is I go along and as an exercise, log into the site and drop every administrator user down to editor. Just do it, all of them. Obviously, probably keep yourself. Though if you drop yourself, that could be quite a fun exercise getting yourself back up.
Oh yeah.
But drop yourself. I mean, that's what I do. As I should say, that it's perfectly easy to do. On my own personal site, I am only an editor. If I want to give myself, I literally have a Adobe PCLI command called "Give me God mode," and it bumps me up for an administrator for 2 hours. At which point, I get downgraded again. So if my account was ever compromised, you just get an editor. And that's all you would ever have. But yeah, drop everybody down to an editor, wait and see who complains.
Yeah.
And I guarantee that in the first couple of weeks, you probably will get one person, because they're the person who's doing the work.
I just got one. Yeah.
There'll be that person who's got to tweak that setting, add that user, or do the plugin updates. The rest will be silent. They won't notice.
Yeah.
And especially bosses and PAs or people who work directly for the boss.
Mm-hmm.
But they feel they have to have it because they are the boss.
Yeah.
It's a really liberating thing to be able to say, for that C-level person to be able to say, actually, you don't need this. You don't even need an account on it. What are you doing with an account on here? Are you going to publish the blog post yourself? No. Let them be an editor if they have to, but push them back. If you do have people who really care about this thing, super duper boss level role, which you just add a role called, I don't know, Uber administrator, or just admin, is a site admin role, and then just set it to an editor anyway. You can there are plugins to allow you to customize roles, or you can do it again, and you do it in WPCLI, which is how I'd recommend doing it.
Yep. And then my favorite subject, backups. So people say backups not a security function. Yes, it is. First of all, I would argue that. I would also argue that we shouldn't depend on our hosts to do our backups for us. I'm a big believer in that. I've seen too many cases of hosts having backup servers hacked. It happened to one big host in the UK. It happened to a big host in Montreal a year ago. It's happened all over the place. And then, folks, when you're taking backups, please check to see if your backup restore works, because I have gone to fix numerous sites. Oh, we have a backup. You do you? Where is it? Oh, we don't know. It goes to some repository. And it's like, you don't know. And then when we find it and you try and do a restore to a test domain, the restore doesn't work. And that happens more than I can count. So backups can be your most precious thing. I'm a big fan of keeping multiple backups. And when I say multiple, I'll go back. I've gone back over a month before. What's your thing around backups?
Well, I'd like just slightly pimp my own things, but
Go ahead.
if anybody's interested, if you visit my YouTube channel, I've got a video called Memes Gone Bad, and I encourage people to watch it. I'm not going to spoil it, but I'm going to encourage people to watch it. It's a little scary, but by the end of it, you will take good backups. Yep. Your brain will kick into why we are going to take good backups. Yep. I think taking good backups is really important. As you say, never rely on your host. Your host may take the most perfect backups, but they're their backups. They're not yours. Now, even if we ignore security, we ignore anything else, we're just talking data portability here. In that I might not want to be with that host next week. That data is mine.
Yes.
So you want a copy of your data. For me, for most of my clients, I recommend that they take daily backups. For a couple of clients, we take hourly database snapshots. For my own personal stuff, I take a daily backup. that is a backup of the files in my uploads folder and of my database, and that's pretty much it. Because everything else I have in version control or I can get from somewhere else. So I try to minimize what's in the backup to the things that are core and vital to the things I'm doing. But the important part of this is that most people think that's where your backup stop, is when you've put it on the backup place and you've left it there. But that's not a backup, that's a prayer.
Yeah.
Or a hope, a desire, a wish that you might one day be able to restore this. Until you've tested that. Now, a backup only becomes a backup when you've restored. And you can show that you've got a process where it's successfully restored. Now that backup is worth something. Up until this point, that backup was just a hope. And so I always encourage people to do backups. And the next stage is go, okay, how are you going to test these backups? And for me, I really like testing backups by using them in other things. So for my own personal site, for example, my backup I then use and I drop down and put it on what is effectively my staging site.
Yes.
Because then when I'm doing testing, I'm testing based on the backup. And so I've got so it's a reversing process. So what happens is, let's say it's midnight, I will do a backup, my daily backup, I will drop it on my staging site. At 1 o'clock, I'll do the updates, my plugin updates, and any tests that will be done is done on that staging site. They all pass. Then I go and push them on the live site. This way, I've got this nice loop where the backup is always being tested.
Yes.
So I always know it's working. I've always known. And more importantly, if the backup fails that first round of tests before I do the updates, I won't do the updates. So I'm not good, because I don't have a guaranteed backup to it. Now that cycle approach works really well. It's a bit fidgety set up, a bit of a pig, but once you've got that set up, it just works seamlessly and it can be fully automated. Bringing your backups and using them in your dev environment so that everybody's using the same backups in your dev environment, another option. Just regularly making use of these backups means that you're guaranteeing that they're there. Because if you don't regularly use them, if they just sit on a shelf, what's the point?
And here's the other thing worth mentioning. One copy or backup file, it's not a true backup. We have seen in this business, multiple people have had computers stolen. And guess where the backup hard drive is? Right next to the computer that just got stolen. So, hi, Mr. Thief, take my hard drive too with all my data. Please take it. I use a Synology NAS server. I have a Synology offsite, believe it or not. So I have one at a friend's house that I kindly pay for internet access for. That's part of our deal. So I have it in their basement. And my two Synologies actually sync overnight when everybody is sleeping. So not only do I have a backup here, if my house burns down, or something happens, or a fire, or Mr. Thief walks in and says, I'll take your NAS server. Guess what? I've got a copy of that away from the computer. So people also got to remember, it's not just the file, it's the medium that matters as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I do. I have a backup that's in the cloud. I use a company called rsync.net, which are based over in Switzerland. And then I have a server just down there, and I have a secondary hard drive that's elsewhere.
Yes, you are
nicely set up. It's a very similar sounding setup. A story that I always tell people about backups, and you saying about keeping them in the same place. Many years ago, I worked in a university, and there was a lovely lad who was doing his PhD, and he got his bag stolen. This will age me as well, because he got his bag stolen, and he lost his laptop, which was impressive. He had a laptop. He also lost his Jazz drive.
Oh, you're dating yourself.
He lost his Jazz drive, which was his backup.
Yeah. And And my favorite story is I have had, forget web stuff. In my day, I've had 3 or 4 hard drives go bad. And you and I were talking in the pre-show, we were talking about my health a little bit. I've just been in the hospital. The first time I went through a diabetic scare, I went through 14 years ago, and I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I came out. My computer at home, in those days, laptops were still expensive. I had a desktop at home. I turned it on, and all I heard was ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And you know what that sound is, Tim? That's a SATA hard drive dying, basically. And I had been in a hospital for 3 weeks, so the machine hadn't been on. And fortunately, in those days, I used a backup product that's still around but morphed out called Carbonite. And before I went to an elaborate backup setup to take more control. And I was able to go buy a new hard drive and within a couple of days do a restore, and I was back up and running. I have lost 4 big hard drives in my time. I have never lost an ounce of data at all. Now, what I would also say, and people say this to me all the time, oh, I don't have web assets. I'm like, okay, do you have photos of loved ones that are not with us that can never be replaced? Yes. So why aren't you doing something? I never thought of it that way. So forget the whole website, which you and I are intruded with. What are your most prized possessions? And those ones that can't be replaced are the ones you need to take care of.
Yeah. And you will never, yeah, the problem with backups and with this sort of scenario is you don't really start thinking about these things until you've had the problem.
Yes.
And it's too late.
Yes.
Especially the family photos. I mean, even looking back on my sort of like life, I've had hard drives fail constantly, and there have been points in my life where I didn't do good backups. So I know I have lost things in my life that I'll never get back because they were gone. Now, for all I know, that might have been, there might be a photo on there that could have been that really special photo. I actually probably I've got backup. We got backups. I've got hard drives that died. I don't actually know what's on them. That's the worst part. In fact, I've got one sort of just under my feet here. That's an IDE drive that I keep thinking that as a project. I'm actually because the thing about IDE drives and the proper spinning Rust is that unlike say a flash drive, it's repairable in theory. I could and certainly could potentially get the data off if I, you know, it's just a stuck cylinder, so I could in theory get it going. And it's been sitting there in my project pile to go and try and do. Partly because I don't remember what's on it, and that, you know, it's quite scary. You know, what was on there 25, 30 years ago?
Yeah. And then while we're talking about hard drives, and again, it's partially web, but partially not. But people need to get through that if you're going to dispose of a hard drive. And here's where it gets interesting. I had a company when I worked in healthcare. They were called Dominion Business Machines. They owned one of the biggest, interesting enough, antique typewriter collections in the world. That's one of their claims to fame. They were in that, but they now do automated stuff. And one of the brothers who now owns the company, their father started it, who I know quite well, Jim Sanderson, and I developed the protocol that Dominion Business Machines uses today to destroy hard drives. And destroying a hard drive doesn't mean I pick up the hard drive, I run to my local recycling depot, and I say, here, please take it. For me, that means, and I just went through this with my own mother, who's 79. She's like, what do you do with an old hard drive out of an old laptop? And I say, if I'm not going to reuse it, the first thing I do is I write military formatted zeros and ones all over the drive. That's my first step. The second thing I do is, if this were a business, I would go to a hard drive destruction place, take them in a pile, and we would serialize all the hard drives to cover our you-know-whats. Yeah, I could say the word ass on my own podcast, I think. And we would serialize them all so that if something comes up, we've got ourselves covered. And we would actually take those hard drives and drop them in a commercial shredder designed exactly for this purpose. Because those of us who know we can recover data off a hard drive if they're not destroyed properly. If they're not for business, I would say take a good drill and drill some holes in it. The lesson there was I was a expert witness in a court case many years ago where, and I can't mention names, where a high-priced executive had a wife who was drop dead gorgeous and decided to have an affair with a 22-year-old model. And he denied it and denied it. And he even formatted the family PC that sat in the living room until I went in with some tools and found all the data that he thought he got rid of and managed to give the divorce attorney all the explicit pictures of him and his new girlfriend, which led to a multi-million-dollar legal settlement. So the lesson here is data is never gone till it's physically gone.
Oh, I thought the lesson was don't take explicit pictures of your girlfriend while having your affair. But okay, we'll go with data is never gone. That's fine. We can do that.
That's another story. Like, yes. But yeah, you gotta be careful of your data as part of security, right?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say you need to I personally, if it's your own drive and you don't care about it, a drill is very therapeutic. And then if you want to take a sledgehammer to it, that's fine. But do the drill first to make sure you're going for anything, because actually whacking it a few times with a sledgehammer, unless it's in lots of pieces at the end of that whacking, probably hasn't done enough.
That's true.
But yeah, no, I used to work at a place where once a month the lorry would turn up, and they had like drawers that you pulled down, and you'd sign away the hard drive, and it would get put in, and it gets slotted in, and then it'd be like this crunching noise and whirling blades, and then they open it up, and the next one, and this was a giant lorry,
Yeah,
and you had like little compartments that you'd slot them in, and it's big business, and it's an expensive business. It costs quite a lot of money to dispose of hard drives. And to the point that I think it might have actually at some points cost more to dispose of the hard drive than it did to buy them at one point.
but that's
I think it's worth saying that hard drives are cheap relatively, so don't be afraid to buy them for your backup systems, and do assume that they're going to fail. If you've got spinning rust, it will fail. It's just when that's fine, just work with that. Make sure that you're using something that's doing RAID, something like, or if you're not using something that's got a physical RAID, something like ZFS or Ceph or any of these ButterFS solutions that will allow you to just add things into a big array and then just let it fail. Once it fails, take it out, destroy it.
RAID is a wonderful thing. We had one I used to on call when I worked in healthcare, and we had a big RAID server that drove an ER application. So ER is kind of critical. And I had a drive go down at not 1 in the morning, 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night, the worst possible time. And it was an IBM server. And IBM and our service company did not have a drive in Toronto. They had to actually airlift me by UPS, a RAID drive from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on a UPS flight, believe it or not, into Toronto, and put it in. But the beauty of RAID is, if one drive goes in a RAID server that's got 4 or 5 RAID drives, you're not up a creek. You got to get it changed to build the array, but you're not done. Thank God. And that's
at least you're not done on that first drive. The problem is when you go, isn't RAID great? We don't have to worry about it. Then another one goes, isn't RAID great? We don't have to, hang on a minute. When do we reach parity? Right.
In this case, I didn't wait for morning. I said, okay. So you got to airlift me a drive out of Philadelphia. When do I get it? 4 in the morning. I said, get it here. And they're like, you really want that drive delivered at 4 in the morning? I said, yes, please. And we have a 24/7 service contract. So the service company that did the work for IBM had to walk in. Not that I couldn't have put a RAID drive in the server, but sorry, guys, that's what we pay you for. And then we had to sit there and watch for the RAID to rebuild itself. But better that than waiting for a second one to go, as you say, and a third one to go. We've covered a lot today, which I really appreciate, Tim. I always appreciate you. Three quick takeaways with what's going on in the wild right now for people for security. Do you have three quick ones?
Oh, three quick ones. Time to exploit is getting shorter.
Yes.
So the time you need to patch the window to patch is getting shorter as well. So if you're not regularly updating, even if you think, oh, it will never happen to me because you've been at this for 20 years and you've been updating websites, and every time you hear us talking about how you have to update regularly, you're thinking, no, I can still patch once a month on a Tuesday.
Oh.
You can't. Exploitation is now measured in hours, not in days and not in weeks, which is what we would have been talking about exploits in weeks even 2 years ago. So in the last 2 years, it's gone down. I really see a scenario very soon where we're going to be talking about updates you need to be updating every 12 hours, not every once a day or every few days.
Auto updates on or off?
Auto updates on from vast majority of people.
Okay.
There are scenarios where it doesn't work for you, for any given person. There are scenarios where you might not want it, but the vast majority of people, the vast majority of companies, and the vast majority of agencies, auto update should be on, enabled. And you should then spend the time building out test suites. So all that time you've spent doing updates, cool. We've just gained you that back. Brilliant. Bad news is now you have to build that into testing. Once you've done that, you have set yourself for life going forward. So I'm a real advocate of automatic updates, especially now we've got the rollbacks features coming in. There really isn't an excuse for most people. I always do put an asterisk there because there is scenarios where it might not. So that was my number one. Number two for WordPress specifically is that as we're getting more and more automatic updates, we are seeing an uptick in changing in direction, and we are seeing a lot more spear phishing campaigns. And that's where a phishing attempt looks really legitimate and is targeted against you. They're normally grabbing your email details from somewhere, your username details, and they're then validating those against your website. Now, often that's by going to the REST API user endpoint, and they are literally comparing the MD5 in your Gravatar email, comparing it to your email to see if it's the same, so they can send you with legitimate details that say, hey, log in here. So if you're getting those sort of things, two-factor authentication is really super important. We are seeing some more bypassing of two-factor authentication through user session hijacking. And so limit those sessions where possible. It's not a bigger deal as I think quite a lot of people make it out to be. I've seen some statistics like 40% of all WordPress hacks were done this way. It's like, no, because we'd know about it if that was the case, but it's still an issue. It's becoming more an issue. And the third one is the biggest problems we're still having is we need to educate people. So get people to listen to this podcast and other podcasts and other pieces, and come listen to us talk about this stuff. And don't go la 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 la. It won't happen to me. Education is the only way we're going to fix any of this. So.
And by the way, the minute you don't think it'll happen to me, you're letting your guide down, and it will happen to you. So keep being on top of educating yourself moving forward.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Thanks, Tim. Somebody wants to find out what you're doing, get a hold of you, employ you. How's the best way?
If they come to timnash.co.uk, which is my website, you can get all my details. You can go find me on the various social bits, though tend to be focused on either Mastodon or LinkedIn these days. I'm not a excrement person very much anymore. I'm doing, depending on when this comes out, I don't know, I am doing a workshop called Confidently Clean a Hacked Site in the 16th of July at like 1 p.m. EST. So if you want to come along to that, details on how to get yourself on the place on the website, timnash.co.uk.
Thanks, Tim. Have an amazing day, my friend.
And you. It's lovely
Thank
to
you.
talk to you as always.
Always. Thank you, sir. This show is brought to you by StunningDigitalMarketing.com, your Toronto leader in digital marketing services. Not only do we protect your WordPress website, we can help you with your site, provide social media management for your business, or even do one-on-one consulting. To find out more, go to StunningDigitalMarketing.com. A very special thank you to Tim Nash for joining me for his monthly segment, Security with Tim, on the SDM Show. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. I love you, and I think about you every day. For more information about Stunning Digital Marketing, your digital marketing experts, go to StunningDigitalMarketing.com or go to StunningDigitalMarketing.info to find out all the great places that Rob Cairns can be found on the web.